Okay, thank you very much for joining us again to the next session. It will be a panel session on lessons learned on real-world generation in Europe in the past 5 years. I have a beautiful panel here that is moderated by Rosa Gini. Rosa Gini is the Vice President of VAC4EU and heading the Pharmacoepidemiological Unit at Ars Toscana. Then I'm very pleased to welcome Peter Arlett from EMA. He is head of the Data Analytics and Methods Task Force at EMA. I'm very pleased to welcome Susana Perez-Gutthann. She's Vice President and Global Head of the Epidemiology in RTI. And I'm very pleased to welcome Emily Karafilakis. She's the European Director of the Vaccine Confidence project that we just learned about from Heidi before. And I'm here with Heather Rubino. She traveled all along over the Atlantic to join us here. She's the head of safety surveillance research at Pfizer and our partner in several studies that we conducted together the past 5 years. Thank you so much for coming. And we have Felipe Villalobos Martinez from IDIAP JGol, where he's a senior researcher and also leading a group of scientists. Thank you very much, and I give over to Rosa for the panel moderation.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Is it working? Is it working now? Okay, so welcome everybody. So what we have 2 panels today. So this morning we're going to, summarize the lessons learned. We've heard from Miriam where we come from. Then pandemic came. We've done what we've done. So what we're going to discuss today is: did we go well? What was not working? So everything that we summarize here will then feed the panel in the afternoon, where we'll look at the future. So how do we use the lessons learned for the next steps? So today we will first have different perspectives. So now we will give the floor to each of our speakers. Each of them will have 10 minutes to provide us with their view on what went well and what went wrong in the past 5 years. Then I will make some questions and try to link what they say and create a bit of a network. And then the floor will be to the public, both here and online. So persons online are free to write their questions, and Taylor will report them to us. But of course, you are also invited to raise your hand and make your questions to our speakers. So I just wanted to introduce Peter a bit more, because Peter Arlett is a lot. He's is the head of the data analytics and methods of the European Medicines Agency, but he's a leader in a lot of what we do. You are chair of the EMA Data Board, co-chair of the HEMA-EMA Network Data Steering Group, co-chair of the EMA AI Coordination Group, co-chair of the Vaccine Monitoring Platform Steering Group, and member of the ACT-EU Steering Group. I also discovered, this I didn't know, that you are honorary professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So please, we are looking forward to hear your perspective, Peter.
My Welsh grandmother used to say, if you've got lots of associations on your CV, it probably means you're getting a bit old. So that's what I would conclude. But thank you for taking the time to read through that long list. Firstly, thanks to VAC4EU for inviting me. It's really nice to be here. I know a lot of people and in the room, and it's a real pleasure to spend the day with you. Also, happy birthday. 5 or nearly 6 years. And a lot has happened in that time. I'm going to be less than 10 minutes, you'll be pleased to hear. I'm going to keep it reasonably short because I've been given a rather privileged slot at the end of the afternoon. So just a few initial reflections. Firstly, I've done my own experiment, and I've been reflecting on whether association always means causation. So I moved to London to join the European Medicines Agency at the end of 2008, and then we had the H1N1 pandemic in 2009, and I moved to Amsterdam to the EMA building at the end of 2019, and in 2020 we had COVID-19. So I'm wondering, well, perhaps I should stay put, would be my conclusion, or maybe association doesn't always mean causation. Anyway, it has been a long journey, and I remember H1N1. I'm particularly pleased that my former colleague Xavier Kurtz is in the audience, because Xavier was the epidemiological brain, and I was the person that did lots of heavy pushing at the EMA, and we made quite a double act, I think, over many years. But I remember H1N1, there wasn't an awful lot in place in terms of monitoring and observational studies of vaccines. It was really, really a struggle to get good data in a timely manner. And I would say we relied largely on spontaneous reports and had to make the best of what we had. Miriam has outlined the story, and moving from that to the Belgian presidency with the call for capacity and capability building on observational research, and then to the Advanced Project, and then to VAC4EU has been a long story, but it's been an important story in advocacy, well, in public health advocacy in a way. So very nice to be here with things an awful lot better than they used to be, I can tell you. One of the messages that at the EMA we keep repeating is about better clinical evidence. And the reason we keep making the point is that we believe that really good clinical evidence is at the heart of product development and at the heart of good decision-making on products, including vaccines. And it's not about observational studies or clinical trials. It's about allowing the research question to drive the study methods that you employ. So the primary demonstration of efficacy will almost always be a randomized controlled trial where feasible. Safety in everyday medical practice will almost always be real-world evidence observational and not a clinical trial. And having an open mind and bringing different specialists together is very central to what we're trying to achieve. Yesterday, in fact, there's one or two of the people in the audience, Olaf was co-chairing part of the meeting. We had a meeting on external controls in clinical trials. And it was fascinating to see the spectrum of specialists in the audience between the epidemiologists and the and the biostatisticians. Some people who basically took the microphone repeatedly to say, well, this should be a randomized controlled trial. And others who were saying, well, that's not always possible, and we need to complement and have really good science to ensure that any external control is actually informative. Anyway, I just wanted to make the point that excellent clinical evidence is at the heart of what we do, and observational research is a very important part of that, hence VAC4EU being very important. Also, maybe I mentioned clinical trials and observational research, but there is a place for primary data, observational primary data collection. There's a place, obviously, to complement with laboratory research, and I think VAC4EU reflects that, because you have a spectrum of different approaches, and we will need that spectrum to respond to different questions. A couple of learnings back, some of them are obvious, but expect the unexpected. It's kind of at the core of drug safety monitoring, pharmacovigilance. But, we weren't expecting narcolepsy, we weren't expecting TTS, and we had to be ready and have an open mind. Just because we can't think of a biological plausibility doesn't mean that it's not causally associated. And that's one of the really interesting lessons for the last 20 years, perhaps 15 years. I'm kind of repeating this point, but I've written down here, we need it all. I want it and I want it all. But we need data, we need access to data, we need methods, we need networks, we need governance, data governance and study governance. We need a law and a mandate for decision making, and we need funds. Again, the work on advocacy for observational research in preparedness, vaccine research, has been a bit of a lesson in all of those elements. A little bit inspired and Emily, I guess you're going to talk a little bit more about, but inspired by Heidi's words, often the discussions about vaccine hesitancy is led, certainly at EMA, by our communications colleagues. And of course it's a communication issue, but fundamentally it's communication based on facts. And I think we should never forget that if we are to be credible and trusted, we need to ensure that we're generating high quality evidence on the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Final point, and it's very much laid out today, and that is the core role of a collaborative approach across stakeholder groups. And I think VAC4EU is a really nice example of that. Thank you.
Okay, points taken, and we will be back to those points in the second round of the panel. But now I would like to ask Heather to introduce her perspective. So Heather, she's responsible for providing strategic and innovative approaches using real-world data in the post-approval setting that will support and inform safety signal identification and characterization. This in Pfizer. But before that, and you do a lot, and you are part of many external working group representing Pfizer. Well, if that's what happens if you survive, you know. But prior to that, you also manage the surveillance and surveillance system program for the Bureau of Epidemiology in the Florida Department of Health. So your perspective is broad, and I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Thanks so much, Rosa.
You have some slides, right?
I did, but we can go without. That's fine.
Okay, great.
Yep. So data is the foundation of informed decision-making. I think we all agree with that. But today, more than ever, those of us responsible for patient and provider safety feel the pressure to ensure that our decisions are powered by robust, transparent, and healthy data. Data needs to be tailored to our work. And in our field, that means measuring the safety and effectiveness of vaccines and drugs. So just as technological advancements, and I'm going to ask you to come along with me in an analogy for a moment, just as technological advancements in farming brought us high-yield crops and abundant food, they also introduced some risks, right? We see a reduced amount of genetic diversity and increased vulnerability to blight. We've learned that our food must be varied, nutritious, and balanced, otherwise malnutrition and starvation can loom. I think the same lesson applies to data. It must be diverse, well-balanced to support sound decisions. I feel like I'm just repeating over here what he said, that we want it all and we want it now, right? So any chefs are gonna tell you that the best ingredients are personal. Data too must be tailored and contextual. Recently, I heard Janet Woodcock, previously of the FDA, speak about the need to move beyond digital replicas of analog solutions and instead create digital solutions for digital problems. This resonates with me with how we approach real-world data. Are our continued investments in normalizing at the source just a digital version of an analog fix? If so, does that analog problem still exist in the same way that it did before? So the problems that we saw in the 2009 pandemic, are we just repeating the solutions that we had to those problems now? What could we be thinking of in the future? So, are our data still too rich and diverse to be digested easily to inform timely decision-making? Because as I understand it, that was a big part of the original problem. And the need for all of this normalization was that the data existed too richly. It was too much free text. It wasn't easy or accessible to go through quickly enough to make real-time decisions on the safety and effectiveness of our medicines and drugs. Can we use digital tools such as intelligent automation and maybe even artificial intelligence to keep data rich and nutritious, curating it and normalizing it only as needed for specific questions and studies? And I think to this end, this is one of the places where VAC4EU shines, and you'll probably hear quite a bit in my talk today about how VAC4EU shines, because the decisions around that normalization happen when we have the important research question pinned down. They're not pre-specified and then applied holistically to everything moving forward. Every decision has to have a cause, right? So AI and intelligent automation are already transforming data at its source. Increasingly, the paper records are disappearing or have completely disappeared. They're replaced by digital forms who themselves are being curated by artificial intelligence in ways that we haven't even identified yet. What's missing, I think, and where we need to go, is our ability to measure these transformations as they are occurring and changing in the real world. So let's go back to the food analogy for a moment. We need to know our farmers, right? Our data farmers, we need to know them. We need to be on first name basis with them. We need to have personal connections with them. And that's also where VAC4EU shines. If you saw the slide that Miriam showed previously with all of the data partners and all of the research partners, it's facilitating that connection that is so critical, particularly when we don't know what our outcomes are going to be, which is a point that Peter was making earlier. Pre-specified case definitions are great until you see something wonky come through and you don't know if it's real or not, and you need to investigate it. So what do I mean by data are being transformed at their source? Let me give you a very personal example. I had a recent visit with my doctor, and she asked if she could record our visit, like transcribe it. And that transcription service was AI assisted. And she did that so that she could spend more time with me, building that connection that helps address vaccine hesitancy, right? That's what we heard in the previous message, that a personal connection at the point of care is so critical, right? So she's doing all of this to improve the quality of the care she's giving me, right? So, when I asked her how the transcription would be used with reference to the medical note, she said, oh, there's another AI tool. So we have an AI transcription, and then we have another AI tool that reads a transcription and summarizes it into a medical note, right? What she would be doing, though, she wouldn't be writing the note herself, but she would review the note for accuracy. And the AI would learn her quirks and start building better medical notes that requires even less attention from her. In the end result would be my medical record. And sometimes I just wonder like how I got to where I got to, because my brain goes, well, if I'm then looking at my data in a database, how will I know that these things were AI assisted? How much AI assistance and transformation is occurring before we even know it's occurring in the databases that we're using? So, sorry. The answer to that is I don't know. To this day, I still don't know if the data points that flew into the databases that I end up using in my work are being flagged as AI supported and how that is fundamentally changing the nature of the data. That's critically important when you're thinking about adjudication, which Rebecca and I were talking about, because we don't have that original unassisted record to go back to adjudicate against, right? And that's particularly important if you work in pharmacovigilance, because we're in the business of rare event surveillance. 1 or 2 events of Guillain-Barré syndrome can make or break a product for patients, right? So understanding the ability to fact check our own data is so critical and transparent. So at the end of the day, well, what am I thinking of here? It's at building the strong partnerships with those data originators, those farmers, right? Benefits everyone. The farmers need to be invested because they need to understand how their food's being used, right? And that'll help them think about what they're doing and how they're doing it in order to better support increased data accuracy for the next generation of data that comes our way, but also because they'll be the first to flag when something is going wrong in their data, because they know it better than we do, and we can't replicate that experience. So at the end of the day, for me, it's those connections. It's the brilliant science and all of that too, but it's the connections that these partnerships, that these distributed models like VAC4EU offers that are so critical and need to be amplified as we have the next coming pandemic. And I know nobody wants to hear that, but if you've been paying any attention to the news around avian influenza, it's coming. It's only a matter of time, and we need to try to capture that lightning in a bottle that Miriam mentioned about having the data ready for when we need it, and being able to move into primary data collection models to complement that, which those partnerships will support also. So anyways, thank you for letting me talk your ears off about this. I'm deeply passionate about this subject. And Rosa, let me give you the mic back.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Heather. So now we see the data. Before we speak with the data farmer, so you will be last, Felipe. Now, so before we go to the two representatives of VAC4EU, which are Susana and Felipe, indeed the PI and the data expert, I would like Emily to speak a bit. And Emily is the assistant professor and the European director of the Vaccine Confidence Project at the London School of Hygiene. We've seen that. She's a senior social scientist with more than 10 years of experience in international research and teaching in academia. She has a background in public health, infectious disease control, and health system and policy research. So please. It does work.
It does work.
It's
It will
strange.
start. It will start at some point. Okay. So I think, well, you've already heard about vaccine confidence from Heidi this morning, so I'll try to bring a little bit different information. But I think I'd just like to say that, to start by saying that I've actually started working in this field, and Advance was my very first project working together with Heidi, so this is very close to my heart as well, and it brings back a lot of memories, good memories. But when thinking about sort of what, lessons learned from the past, I don't think I should go back all the way to Advance, because things changed so much. So I think we have to be really up to date with the latest changes, and so I'll try to reflect a bit more on the last few months, last few years, and what that means for real-world evidence and the work that you do. So I think at the moment, what I think the most important message is that evidence in itself is not enough. We need more than that. Data in itself is not enough. What we've been seeing, I cannot talk about confidence without anyone in the room not expecting me to mention the US and what's been happening in the past few months, sorry. But I think what we're seeing in the US is very different from past crises that we've seen. It's not just a vaccine debate. It's really a shift, a political shift that we're seeing, and it's about how vaccine decisions are made. It's no longer about vaccines decisions being influenced by data, by public health, by science, but it's decisions being made influenced by political identity. And we've been warning about this, we've been talking about the risks of that for a long time, and this is happening now. The risk for the US in Europe, for Europe, of what's happening in the US, is not just about copying what's happening there. That's not really it. The risk that we have is that we copy the logic of what's happening there. So it's the idea that vaccine recommendations are political choices rather than evidence-based, rather than based on data and real-world evidence. And once that door opens, it's going to be very difficult to close it. And unfortunately, we're already seeing it happening in some countries, with what's been happening in Italy, although avoided, thankfully, but also with groups having conversations about anti-vaccination stands in the European Parliament in the past few weeks. So there's already a lot happening. And it's no longer about individual confidence. One of the points that I often make in these presentations is that we have to think about people. Vaccine confidence is about individuals. It's about, in a way, I was talking to Eva about this, I really hate that people talk about anti-vaxxers, about anti-vaccination, and polarize this conversation even more, because it's not about that. It's about the fact that everyone has the right to have questions about vaccination. They want to make informed decisions with the information that they have, and it is a very difficult thing to do for people. When you think about all the science, all the data that comes into making recommendations about vaccination, imagine what that means for parents. So it's normal for people to have questions, and that's normally what I say. But I think today we have to go beyond that. It's no longer about the individual. It's about organized networks that we're seeing shaping professional and political influences. And that's where we really need real-world evidence to come in. Because generating robust vaccine safety and vaccine data is just half of the equation. The other half is whether people will actually trust the system that analyze and communicate that data. And if trust collapses, then evidence loses its power. So we've been trying to build trust in an environment that another important point that I want to make is the environment has changed enormously in terms of information. And you mentioned this with AI, and we've seen this with confidence as well. Just, recently I was at a doctor that asked me whether he could use AI in a different way. They was actually looking at vaccine recommendations. I was about to travel, and they didn't have the information about which vaccines I should be taking for where I was going. So they asked ChatGPT. He's like, which vaccine should I give this woman? That's one side, but then more and more you read reports of people actually preferring AI tools to doctors because they have more emotional connections and conversations with AI tools because doctors don't have time. As you said, they use AI to summarize their notes, and they feel more connection to tools like ChatGPT that are learning to become more and more emotional. So we have to understand that the way we're trying to build trust is happening in a new information environment. And we talked a lot about misinformation, and Heidi talked a lot about misinformation, but it's not just about misinformation as well. It's about the emotional appeal of misinformation. What misinformation does very well is that it really triggers our fears, our hope, our sense of belonging to certain groups, and that's what we have to be worried about. But that's also what we have to learn from. And I think one of the main messages that, don't abandon science. We have to use data, we have to use evidence, but try humanizing it. Try making it more personal, more emotional, so that it makes sense, that sense of belonging, that sense of recognition, that people can actually feel connected and understand why they need certain vaccines and why it's good and safe for them, for example. And I think the good news is that, platforms like VAC4EU really are helping in that because they can generate that high quality data, the evidence and transparency. But I would like our communication system to be to that level as well, that we have that type of collaboration for confidence monitoring, trust monitoring, for communication, that we make sure that communication and safety monitoring, and confidence monitoring is treated as importantly as safety monitoring. And we also need to think about being proactive rather than reactive. A lot of the time, what happened during COVID, we've seen that we didn't have data, there was a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of the communication was very reactive. So yes, there were preparedness plans, but they did not always help us. And we depended on people reacting to the information. I think that obviously needs to change, and we need to be better prepared. But we also need to understand, I think one example I want to give is the importance of experts taking stands. And I think I was at a meeting, I can't see Pierre anymore, but he was there earlier. We were at a meeting last week, and he mentioned something, one of the very good lessons from the pandemic was how many experts took stage, how many scientists were in front TV news, national TV news, radio, they were all over the place. But that's not the case anymore. So why did that stop? Where are the lessons learned from that? And I'll just finish, I think, by saying that, it kind of goes back to what Heidi was saying, but if the US is stepping back now as a global anchor in public health messaging, we need to make sure that somebody else takes that space. And I think Europe has not only an opportunity, but a responsibility to be that voice in terms of data management, data gathering, but also in terms of communication. And we have to show communication excellence, and the same way that, vaccine systems and the strength of our vaccine systems depends not only on what we know, it depends as well on whether people believe it. And that's what matters most. So I think Europe has to be equipped and has to think about how to be better prepared, how to communicate better, and how to fill the gap that the US is leaving today? Thanks.
Okay, Emily, thank you very much. Yes. So next speaker, now it's VAC4EU that takes the word. So we will speak a bit of the behind the scenes of what has happened during these years, what worked and what didn't, and the representative of the so we will do that with a representative of the principal investigators and the representative of the local experts, which are, let's say, somehow the cornerstone of the generation of evidence for VAC4EU. And, well, Susana, what should I say? I took some notes.
Finding another way to call me old.
Well, I don't know. You are just our light, I think. So that's, well, if you want to say that you're old, yes, please. I'm happy to join you as soon as possible. And you have over 3 decades of experience driving strategy and research programs for safety, risk management, development, real-world evidence, and regulatory activities, applying public health and epidemiology methods. And you are also very active in all the networks that I know. You are always leading, and you are always putting time and energy. And I will just mention, of course, the International Society of Pharmacoepidemiology, the steering committee of the European Medicines Agency of the NCEP. You have co-led the development of the ISPI Good Pharmacoepidemiology Practice, the NCEP Research Standards, and yeah, so that's Susana.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Coming up? Okay, thank you. Happy birthday to all of us, of course, and it's a pleasure to be here in Brussels to share the perspectives of a PI center within the VAC4EU community. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the PI centers do. So going back to before communicating, we need to get the best possible science, and what our journey was at RTI, and then share some lessons learned and some thoughts about the future, if I can now advance the slides. Okay, good. So the role of a PI center is, the PI center is the responsible for the scientific, I don't know what's happening, that's a stress test, I guess, for the scientific leadership and the conduct of the study in collaboration with all the other research centers in the VAC4EU community, and directly also with the marketing authorization applicant or holder, and a bit more indirectly through the communications of the marketing authorization holder applicant with the regulatory authorities that are driving the conduct of the study in the case of regulatory studies. In a nutshell, PI centers are responsible for the study to be implemented according to the protocol and to all the procedures and guidances, both within VAC4EU and the applicable data sources and in international. A key element of the VAC4EU environment is that when you volunteer yourself to become a PI center, you're also committing to participate in the regular working group meetings of the principal investigators that brings together everyone in that role working at current studies that are ongoing within VAC4EU. And of course, the PI Center is only one piece of the VAC4EU community, and we work very closely with the working groups and with specific members that are in the other roles. We have working groups for statistics and methods, for project management and contracting, as has been already discussed, the centers that have expertise and access to data are absolutely critical. And then there's, over the course of these years, there have been specific task forces developed for topics that were of interest and impact for all the portfolio within the VAC4EU research list. Thanks to the Secretariat for handing over a list of the many studies. You have seen a different version of this from Miriam's presentation. Here is that for every study you have PI or co-PI centers, and the centers that have been in this role include Aarhus University, Julius Clinical, LAREP in the Netherlands, UMC Utrecht, University of Bordeaux, the Spanish Medicines Agency, RTI Health Solutions, Art Toscana, and the University of Verona. So I'm giving you one perspective, which was ours, but there's many other centers that have contributed to the scientific leadership as PI centers or co-PI centers in VAC4EU. Our journey started with the closing of the advanced project, because we hadn't been working in vaccines that much. And Miriam invited us and said, well, we don't have any data, the specific data source access. And she said, well, we also need centers that have strong methods expertise and are excellent at running multi-data source studies. So we went there 2019 and we became members very soon, and obviously then we joined the community. Our first activity was indeed not data related. It was in the EMA-funded Access project to prepare the protocol templates. We were extremely active in there. And that was kind of jumping into the field with the rest of the community in a very active way. And we ended up copying or PIing 3 of the 4 large early pandemic vaccine programs, and now a more recent study. But because we also have colleagues in the Atlantic, on the other side of the Atlantic, we were also involved in studies in collaboration with the US CBER division, and as well as some in collaboration with Harold Pilgrim Healthcare Institute with some of the sponsored vaccine studies as well. So we want to think that we contributed to the transatlantic connections and lessons learned early on in the pandemic by working across all these areas. What we have learned is I mean, nothing new in this audience. Early collaboration and constant communication is essential. I cannot emphasize the critical success factors of EMA spearheading this development of protocols that became the basis not only for protocols for vaccine safety, effectiveness, and other coverage in Europe, in the European Union and in Europe, but they became used across the world. And being able to jump into the vaccine studies, not having to worry about the skeleton, then there was a lot of adjustments and so forth. But when we look back, it was, I think, as I said, a critical success factor. Working together in the VAC4EU ecosystem allowed us to share issues, brainstorm on issues, brainstorm on solution. We had to, of course, and also develop tools and process development, because at the time it was early days. The readiness was for a very different disease. And so it was a very dynamic and learning environment. It was a steep and also very asymmetric learning curve, because each of the centers was coming from different experience, bringing a lot of expertise, but also bringing different gaps in what we had or had not done. We all needed to learn about the disease, about the roles and responsibilities within the VAC4EU community, processes, and as it has emphasized the value of the conception harmonization pipeline, which is research question driven, that was also learning for all of us, and also starting to adapt that tool that had been developed for a very different population, basically to the broader population that was using vaccines. Our team being based in Barcelona, very densely population city, hit very early and very dramatically by the pandemic. But everybody else in the team in VAC4EU, we were dealing with the pandemic ourselves at a personal and professional level. I remember going into everybody at the same time moving to a remote environment. Suddenly we're thinking, my God, 7,000 people moving to working remotely in my institute. Are the servers going to crash? And we were all, and I think this happened across institutions. Also, colleagues getting very, very sick, not being able to get to hospital. I mean, all of this is something that now maybe we forget the bad times, but I think that living all of this together with purposeful studies, with research goals, I think it gave us a sense of purpose and a drive to move through these very challenging times and address all the challenges that came along. We've talked about data. I think this pandemic was one of the first situations where we suddenly had to work with the whole population because you were either vaccinated or unvaccinated. And I know many colleagues in the room working with data, servers started crashing, even just trying to do basic population selection, matching, let alone talking about bootstrapping and other complex methods. A big challenge was also the data releases. Institutions holding data, people were also getting sick and pulled into a lot of medical and nursing personnel was pulled away from the research roles and moved into actual care. So data arrived late, sometimes the data sets arrived incomplete. We tried to work with synthetic data and we learned a lot because then the programs crashed because that particular case was not represented in the synthetic data. Of course, without saying, we worked on definitions, coding, the catalog, so lots of things. But I truly think we couldn't have, and all of this under the time pressure, not only the regulatory, in the case for regulatory studies, 6-month period, but the vaccines were in use by massive amount of population, and for once it was our family, all of us, the neighbors, so that it's the one time, I think, as a researcher, that we felt that what we're doing has direct implications for patients, but also by the community at large. So, what is next? How ready are we for a future pandemic, which nobody wants to, but obviously we need to be thinking about? I think that we have under the belt a massive experience in planning, implementing critical studies in a pandemic setting. I think the pharmacoepidemiology, real-world evidence methods, as part of a large evolution over the last couple of decades, very often in safety, we have robust methods, robust frameworks like the target trial emulation frameworks. We have lots of regulatory guidance, a lot more specifications. So I think there we are on a safe foot, at least not to make what has been called self-inflicted design errors with the data that we have. We all have learned we need to build on increased staffing and infrastructure and have clarity of roles, responsibilities, and learning on processes and tools. I think the big dependence, as it has been mentioned already, is the data quality and the timeliness. And as always, and this has been, I hope it doesn't sound trite, but this is certainly one of the most repeated proverbs mentioned, that working together is the best way forward. And I found this image, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, which has been much quoted. Not that we looked anything close like this rowers at the beginning of the pandemic, but now we're starting to go in that direction. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel conversation.
So thank you, Susana. This has been, emotional also for me to remember those days. And now let's go to the, yes, please, Felipe. So we go to the farmer, right? To the data farmer. And so Felipe is, he works in Barcelona in one of our data sources that are really, I mean, super fast, super, I mean, it's a joy to work with them. And this is the personal part. And Felipe, among multiple things, working in EMA projects, also an industry-funded project. He's also now participating in a project of the WHO in Latin America on dengue vaccine. That's very, very important. And he's now member of the advisory board of ISOP. Congratulations also on that, Felipe. Please.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you so much, VAC4EU, for the invitation. So, good morning, everybody. I want just to start my presentation with 5 years ago when VAC4EU began. The question was a little bit ambitious about, can diverse European healthcare system generate credible, timely vaccine safety evidence together? Well, today, VAC4EU, with more than 28 members and 40 data partners covering 180 million European citizens, we know that the answer is yes, but with critical lessons learned. So today, as a data expert and access partner, I represent IDIAP, but I represent 5 million people in Catalonia, and one of the 14 local data partners organization that makes VAC4EU mission possible. So in this time, I want to share what we learned about the human foundation that underlies every successful in real-world initiative. So the first lesson that I want to highlight is local expertise matter. So 5 years ago, we believed that standardizing protocols, standardized data models, harmonizing protocols will solve the complexity of European healthcare diversity, but I think we were half right. What we discovered in this journey with VAC4EU is that data by itself has no meaning. It acquires meaning only through understanding the local health reality in which it was generated. So let me give you a concrete example from CVAP. For example, myocarditis detection. So CVAP is a primary care database which is linked to hospital-based system. Most of these clinical conditions in primary care data were identified early compared to the hospital admission. So these key findings could be same clinical phenomenon, but different detection pathways. So we require the local expert interpretation to avoid false positive from overly broad definitions, false negatives from excluding early detection or invalid comparison across incompatible populations, like clinical conditions detected in primary care or detected in hospital. So what is the value of the local expertise? So what data expert and access partner brings to this community is deep understanding of data structure and history, knowledge of coding changes and evolution, recognition of healthcare system pathways, ability to distinguish artifacts from true signals, and clinical and epidemiology context for interpretation or data. So I just want to highlight that data doesn't interpret itself. It's indeed expertise transform raw data into actionable evidence. So that's one of the lessons that we learn in this journey with VAC4EU. Local expertise matter. The lesson 2 that we learned during this journey, we already talked about this with the previous panelists, multidisciplinary collaboration. VAC4EU working group models, for example, we have different working groups together in VAC4EU, principal investigator, methods, statistics, and programming working group, and data expert and access partner working group. I just forgot to mention another working group, which is very, very, very important in this community, which is the Little Operations Center and project managers. All of them are very, very, very important when we are talking about collaboration. So in this journey, we have many, many multidisciplinary teams. We have epidemiologists, clinicians, methodologists, data managers, statisticians, programmers, etc., and data experts. So when the expert teams come together, science gets better. So one of the examples that we found in the previous pandemic is about ETS investigation. The challenge was very hard. Is this a true vaccine safety signal? So the multidisciplinary response to this issue was the working together with many multidisciplinary teams. We can just have a very rapid result, credible signal investigation that maintain public trust. So that's why the multidisciplinary advantage that VAC4EU model has been developed during these 5 years. Multidisciplinary from the start, all disciplines collaborate from protocol design through publication, and the advantage of this was catch errors early, identifies when statistics mark clinical reality, and anticipate public health feeds, faster decision makers, coordinated, not sequential, and more credible and more actionable evidence. Third lessons that we have been learned during this and from the data expert perspective is transparency and collaborative governance. Trust is built through visibility. Before we have a traditional approach, researchers analyze the data and publish results. Now with the VAC4EU approach, researchers analyze the data, data partners review the data, collaborative approval for the results, and then publish results. Yes, this could take a little bit time in produce evidence, but I think it is a very important part of the change of to produce real evidence. So in this case, the data expert and access partner are involved in this change of generate evidence, because what IDIAP review asks is, for example, does this make sense in our local healthcare context? Are there data quality concerns we need to flag? Do we have confidence in these conclusions? And are there limitations we should highlight? So the app questions catch those answers. For example, false positive from coding artifacts, statistical significance and max clinical implausibility, methods that work on paper but maybe not in practice, and communications issues that could undermine trust. Lesson 4. Lesson 4, expertise is infrastructure. Unfortunately, for example, our case in IDIAP, in 2020, we were just a core team of primary care researchers. We were just a primary care researcher and a statistician who started in the Access project. In the 2021, we have 3 simultaneous vaccine safety studies. In the 2023, we had more than 10 simultaneous studies with the same thin size. So from my side, the challenge was very critical because we were growing demand without proportional resources growth, managed through extraordinary efforts, but not sustainable long-term. So that's why we want to build about expertise is infrastructure, real world people, really people infrastructure, trained epidemiologists, experienced data science, skilled clinical experts, and seasoned public health professionals. So can we build this during emergency? I don't think so. So that's why investments require career development pathways, continuous training, institutional support, and long-term funding, not just project by project. So investing in people is investing in preparedness. And the lesson 5 that I want to highlight is the global equity and capacity building. So the European Foundation VAC4EU success reflects decades of European investment, electronic health records infrastructure, a standardized coding system, professional workforce in epidemiology, institutional research capacity. But what is the global challenge? The global challenge, Africa, Latin America, and much of the Asia areas don't have these foundations. So the next chapter for VAC4EU should be commitment to the global equity. What VAC4EU next chapter requires is intentional choice needed, training programs for low middle income professionals, research funding for local investigators, partnership agreements recognizing local expertise as equal, publications sharing leadership with local scientists, and decision-making involving local interests. This is a very approach that WHO Global Vaccine Safety Model, so results will be resilient global system where every region has embedded expertise. So the critical question, I will just finish, when the next pandemic arrives and history tells us it will be prepared, and I'm saying that not because we have better computers or servers, but because we have embedded local expertise in every data sources, multidisciplinary teams ready to mobilize, transparent governance structure, proven collaboration networks, and sustained commitment to expertise and equity. This requires decision today, not during the crisis. So this is the lessons from 5 years of VAC4EU that I would like to mention. Real-world evidence is only as good as understanding of the real world it represents. Multidisciplinary collaborations produce more credible, faster, and more actionable evidence. Transparent governments and collaborative review build durable public trust. Expertise must be deliberately cultivated and sustained as critical infrastructure, and global success requires equitable capacity building and not just data extraction. So that's the lessons that we learned from 5 years of VAC4EU as a IDIAP representative. So thank you so much.
So, thank you, Felipe. So that was really a very nice summary of our first round. I think we have now received from all of you some reflections and some recommendations. But before we go to our audience for questions, I would like to ask 2 questions. First one, if you can for us, so you have given us the result of your reflections and your recommendations. I would like you to go back a bit and share episodes. So, 2009, there was not an infrastructure, right? There was not a capacity to address questions about vaccine safety, or probably also coverage. Now, in this pandemic, in these 5 years, episodes, what went well and what disappointed you? So those 10, 12 years, what have produced really in comparison, in this occasion? So this is the first question I would like to share, and please.
I don't mind taking a stab at this. So one of the things that really knocked me in this pandemic was the fact that the first evidence on the safety of, and we were first to market, right? So we were the first, Pfizer was the first to market, first to generate safety evidence. The very first safety evidence that we were able to generate that went to regulators was primary data collection. in the moment, the old ways were new again. All of this investment that we'd made in secondary data sources was not able to generate the data quickly enough to overcome how quickly we can generate data when we go directly to patients. Now, one of the things that I think is really optimistic about that is a concept of using mixed method approaches. Primary data collection is really great when you have a lot of enthusiasm from your participants. And I think we probably all sitting here with cell phones full of apps that we used for the first 30 days, maybe a little bit in the next 30 days, and then promptly forgot about. And so where I think we have a lot of power is in the very beginning, continuing to lean on these primary data collection models, but doing medium and long-term follow-up using secondary data so that it's not one or the other, but how can we take advantages of the strengths of both to move it forward? I think that'll allow us to connect with the first patients that ever receive products, knowing that the earliest signals will come from them if they exist, right? So that's why I think it's so important to bring the partners together, because they're gonna know what that patient care is looking like at its source. They're gonna understand the value of that care, and then they'll be able to pull that through as we put less burden on patients to tell us about their own safety and are able to pick them up with robust, transparent, real-world data, at least until we can shorten the gap of the 6 months it took for us between the first generation of data in a primary data collection model to the first generation of data in a secondary data collection model.
Okay, so I see. So the disappointment, let's say, or the surprise maybe was that the old spontaneous report, or not only primary data collection, right? So that the old really methods came up, and maybe the good thing was that actually eventually secondary data collection came along, and the two contributed really to reinforce and assess signals. What about Emily? So, but because, and now I'm not asking really, I'm really asking, of course you are an expert in confidence, but you saw now, just think of evidence, what was available and how, from your perspective, was okay, that's how it should be, and what was, come on.
So, well, I'll have to focus on the communication side of that evidence, and I think from my experience and from what I've seen during the pandemic, one of the biggest challenge that remained was, yes, the evidence came quickly, but then the communication did not always follow. And I think there are many examples of where, unfortunately, it did not go well. And, you know, in terms of new safety signals and how these were communicated and created a lot of panic, not to name any vaccine, but I think that there were major crises from that moment. But I think mostly it's also about who was communicating. And I think science failed to communicate uncertainty and to communicate what data we're missing. And most of the time, people were left with not knowing who to listen to and where to get information when they didn't have the answers. And we should have done a better job as scientists to know how to communicate what we don't know. Because unfortunately, when we don't fill that gap, it's filled by someone else. And it's been filled by politicians with very personal agendas and by others, of course. So I would say that's one key element that I'd like to see improved in the future is scientists knowing how to communicate new developments in terms of vaccine safety and other events, and uncertainty as well. Going as well, adding on to that in terms of more positive and what went well, and again talking about who communicates. I think what went really well is that scientists started to work with peers and using peer communication. And there's countless examples of really good initiatives that made use, for example, of youth groups to try to teach young people about COVID and vaccines and motivate them to vaccinate. There's been examples of local communities, religious groups. So that type of engagement was very powerful, and we've seen that. So having connections already set up now with these groups in times of non-crises is very helpful for future pandemics, so that when something happens and we need to very quickly deliver new messages, whether it's new data, whether it's something else, we know we can rely on these links, and we know we can go to these people who are already trained, who know already about science, and we can use them to help us communicate more widely to their peers. So that's one positive example.
That is very, very, very valuable to understand that. But let me get this straight. So because that's a problem with science, is that it is inherently uncertain. So if you want to make a communication, and it happened, you give very strong message, like if you vaccinate, you will not be contagious to your grandpa, right? And then it comes out it's not actually true. So if you try to adopt forms of communication that are too direct, you're actually losing the point of science itself. So what you're saying is that scientists should communicate uncertainty?
Yes.
So they should be able to say, I think this is what is going to happen, but we really are not sure yet.
Yes.
So we need to take, so you think that this, because for me that's a huge question. I try to communicate uncertainty, and I have the impression of seeding anxiety and confusion. But you think at the end of the day, it's worth.
I mean,
the
there are
investment.
different spaces for that to happen. I think that there are different communications that will happen. But I think people need to understand that there is uncertainty in science. But most importantly, we as scientists also need to acknowledge when we've been wrong. And I think that, again, didn't happen as much with COVID and even with H1N1 before. Part of the answer is to talk about it so people are aware that facts change, things change, recommendations will change. I mean, the number of recommendations that happen, just if you take the example of pregnant women, the number of recommendations that change: do not get vaccinated, we don't have it, not that I do get vaccinated because now we have the data. How are women supposed to trust the information if we don't tell them and explain the process of where we get that scientific information? Not in every communication, not in every space, but that information has to be there.
So we need to tell stories.
Of course.
Oh, that's a very, very nice advice. Peter, how do we get this advice? And yeah.
I'm not going to answer your question, Rosa. I've done a career not answering Rosa's questions. I'm going to answer your original question. So just two really positive things I want to call out, and then maybe a call to arms. First, really positive things. Within 9 months of announcing a pandemic, we had vaccines through 2 different vaccine platforms, adenovirus and messenger RNA, being rolled out to hundreds of millions of people. I mean, that's a fantastic success of, I would say, preparedness and industry and government and stakeholders working together. Second point I would raise is more local to us today, and that is that in comparison to H1N1, we had, as EMA, contracts in place with excellent academic and service provider networks like VAC4EU, so we could put in place protocols and templates and then monitoring and adverse events of special interest, and that could happen very quickly. So that's down to advance. It's down to VAC4EU. It's down to EMA working with stakeholders. My call to arms is about timeliness of data, and Felipe, slightly inspired by your intervention, that it really isn't terribly helpful having really good data next year to say retrospectively what the safety would have been or what the effectiveness would have been. We really need to know almost in real time, and I think we need a big push between, all stakeholders, to work with the primary data partners, if you like, to have that data upload in near real time. Thank you.
But to this second point, now, if you remember, was there a moment really when you felt you needed the data and you failed to have them in those days? Or did you, in some sense, because there was something, so was that something reasonably okay?
You're asking for a binary answer to a question that's always shades of grey. So you make the best of what you can get. And I think we did a pretty good job based on what we could get. But I made a comment in my first intervention about flu effectiveness studies. I mean, it's really difficult. We can do it in the Nordic countries, but getting multiple European countries to provide you vaccine effectiveness data in the season is really hard, and that's something that I would really like to see change in the next year or two. And that's about working with data partners, isn't it?
Because if I may, now I take advantage of my role of moderators. I really saw, due to the motivations that Susana highlighted, I saw things happen during those days in a manner that ordinarily are really not possible. Because and the problem is not that they are technically not possible, because in those days they were possible. So willingness was there, everybody was doing what was needed. So we were able to provide data within days if needed. But this is not definitely the situation in general. And I wonder, and can I just make to you a very important follow-up questions? It looks sometimes that, so Europe is so rich. We could do everything. And sometimes there looks like there is no coordination. For example, one important hurdle is really the data protection, the local interpretation of data protection legislation. And now the European data space is going to arrive. So it's important, I think, that there comes from Europe an encouragement really to create this capacity and the ability of generate, because we were able to do it when the political and structural willingness was there. And normally I think this is what is in the way a bit. So Europe will rise to the challenge.
I'm going to half answer your question. And just to say, I mean, you mentioned European Health Data Space. European Health Data Space is a fantastic opportunity if we take it. And I really, really, really call on people doing operational pharmacoepidemiological research, secondary use of healthcare data, to engage, really engage, because otherwise the rules and the technical requirements will be laid down by people who don't have operational experience, and it may not deliver on the potential, would be my say.
Thank you so much.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? In terms of not delivering on the potential, I was in public health long before I was ever in pharma. And one of the things that was really important to me is the return on the investment that people make out of their tax dollars. Because at the end of the day, it's the tax dollars that are paying for these things. And those tax dollars need to be giving a return on the investment. And that return on investment is vaccine effectiveness in real time. It's vaccine safety in real time. You were looking for a personal story before in the pandemic. I was literally designing the study to measure the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine in pregnancy when my best friend was pregnant, and she was trying to make the decision about whether or not she should get vaccinated. And I, in the prime position to be able to answer that, was completely unable to answer it. And that sits with me in a very, she ended up choosing to get vaccinated, but I had nothing to give her. And that's a story that's replicated over and over and over again for the people that were doing this work. But how can we, and I see the US doing the same thing in terms of walking back from some of the access that it made to data in the pandemic, walking back from these things. How can we continue to make the argument not just on a humanistic perspective, but also a return on the investment, a return on the value that you all and I am participating in this grand experiment? How can, How can Pfizer help deliver that message that these are critical returns on investment for patients, for population health, so to make sure that that access continues and is improved?
Heather posed that question as if I was going to have the answer. It was what I would say, I mean, there's a theme coming out, particularly given the choice of your keynote speaker with Heidi, and that is that it's not just about generating the evidence, it's about communicating on top of, about the evidence, but of course that also is about benefits. So maybe, dare I say, VAC4EU with its beloved working groups needs to, grasp that and go beyond generation of evidence and become a centre of excellence in terms of communicating it as well as its benefits. That's my way of sidestepping your direct question. Yeah.
President, I think we have some homework to do. Patrick, can we just... Exactly. We just end the round, and I think we're ready then to open the floor to the audience. Please, Felipe.
No, I just want to go back a little bit about your first question about what went well in VAC4EU or in other networks. I think the most important thing is that the impact on regulatory decision making that we made with the generation of real-world evidence. So with all this data that we have, that is a diversity of data and scientific collaboration, I think it was possible to make real-world evidence just to impact on the decision making. For example, support their booster policy, targeting recommendations for vulnerable groups. So I think it's also one of the important things of this that went well. So we can generate evidence to make decisions.
You mean on subpopulations, particular? That's very valuable. Thank you, Felipe. And Susana, you close with the...
Well, I'm reacting a little bit to what has been mentioned. We keep talking about Felipe and colleagues in the IDIAP group as data farmers. Farmers prepare the soil, put the seeds, and then gather. That's not us in the VAC4EU community. We're gathering the data, the product, let's say, preparing the ground, and so that is absolutely out of our control. And that is where I think one of the concerns that I have in terms of where healthcare systems are going, the fragmentation, et cetera, that's going to make things more complicated. And Peter, to your point, we're all trying to go through the, 1180 page of very legally sounding documents that have been released for the guidances to access data in the context of the European health data space. I have to say that surpasses, what we can attempt to as researchers is go through the documents and pick up on things that basically hit you in the eye, like saying, there's no requirements for whoever can work with the data. You don't need epidemiologists or data scientists or whatever. But I think it's a challenging situation, and I think we're doing efforts to do this together. But at the end of the day, it would be great. Now I'm going to go back to some old days. I remember the early days of NSEP where EMA helped us walk through some of the more legal aspects of the framework program legislation so that we could build a European research community to apply for this as part of this consortium. I'm not saying it's all on EMA. It's a collective endeavor, but certainly it's hard for research institutions. We can deal with many aspects of data protection, but these are extremely legalistic documents that we find quite challenging to work with. Yeah.
Okay, so I will summarize. Peter, if you agree, I think we have a point in the agenda for the NSEP plenary, right? Speaking about European health data stay. Yes, definitely. I must also add, before I give the floor to I give the word to the audience, that indeed we are structuring together as VAC4EU, as Sigma, we are trying to indeed engage. So we go personally to the stakeholder consultation. We have understood that it's a very, the European data space, it's a very important, and we are trying to, but it would be great indeed to do that. If maybe we can speak about how we can do that in the European health data space, in the NCEP plenary. That would be, which is a great place. Okay, guys, I think we have provided some elements, and now, please, we are looking forward to your questions, your input, also comments, also from home. Taylor is ready to gather the questions that come. Please.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, I was at the European Parliament, and they were explaining what the future of vaccine will be, and they've done some social economic studies. And just to answer your questions on return on investment, apparently what we can estimate is that for €1, or let's say $1 spent on vaccine, the return is 19 times, 19. So I think that if you look for economic argument to explain what the benefit is on the return on investment regarding vaccination, I think it's quite significant.
Thank you.
I think that that's a great piece, and my point there wasn't that there's a single argument, but that we are in here motivated by the human cost of things. But there's a lot of people out in the world for whom that message falls flat compared to the financial argument. So I think we need to take a page out of your book, which is to communicate to our audience in the language that they understand, both English or Français or whatever the case may be, but also in the thing that motivates them intrinsically.
Thank you, Heather.
Hi, Rebecca Chandler-Seppi. I want to thank all the panelists for their short presentations and the discussions. I found myself nodding my head in agreement with a lot of the things that people have said. It's been very inspiring, and I want to maybe gather a couple of the themes that have come up and maybe pose this as something for the future based on some lessons learned. Just a little perspective. I mean, I came into vaccine safety with the H1N1 pandemic as a pretty fresh infectious diseases physician who from the United States who landed a job at the Swedish Medical Products Agency and watched narcolepsy unfold on a daily basis. And it really changed my life. So it was a big lesson for me. And as I've been in this business now for almost a couple of decades, I want to ask this group if it's possible for VAC4EU potentially to take the lead in really advancing vaccine safety science. I think that we're at a real pivotal point about we have traditionally addressed questions of causality rather straightforward, rather simplistically. I think with a lot of the safety signals that we have seen, narcolepsy, VITT, we're understanding that vaccines are likely not the single cause. Questions of causality are complicated. And I wonder about the methodologies that we use. Are they out of date? Are they archaic? Can we do better in our methodologies to untangle questions of causality? This, to me, relates to vaccine confidence. I think the public, at a very layman's level, understands this. They understand that medicines don't work the same in every individual. That's completely acceptable. Even my daughter, I don't want to take ibuprofen. Paracetamol works better for me, at 18 years old. So to translate this into vaccines is not complicated, but the messaging that they get, more often than not, is one size fits all. So understanding risk groups, untangling the complexity and nuances, and can Can VAC4EU moving forward be a leader in kind of understand those methodologies? I've learned a lot about that working group, and also maybe about how we communicate that.
So I heard two things come up there, and I think the first piece of that is oftentimes when we're looking at these events, the best surveillance we do for those events are when they're in the context of pharmacoepidemiology, right? Let's take Guillain-Barré syndrome as a really great example on that. There is not, or historically has not been, the level of surveillance on Guillain-Barré syndrome that a million other diseases would get. It's not a nationally notifiable disease in the United States. The amount of work and effort and infrastructure isn't there. So if you see something, it happens through the pharmacovigilance system, and then you're missing the context, to the point that you were making earlier. And I want to paraphrase something you said earlier, which is that you can't build the ambulance when you haven't built the road to get the ambulance to the hospital, right? So that infrastructure needs to be built in the downtimes. And that's where I think VAC4EU has already been leading the charge, but also has an opportunity to continue leading the charge. I'd like to see just as much investment in understanding the natural history of these diseases and how they are changing in real time, not a 5-year cohort analysis, real-time surveillance of these diseases and understanding what are the social and maybe even emotional determinants of what these diseases might be, to provide the appropriate context. Right? I often make the joke, and it's not a joke, but it's the devil is in the denominator. Sorry, I'm a giant nerd. I'm an epidemiologist. I can't help it. And I think that that's the critical piece of that, is we hyper-focus on the events when they're post-vaccine instead of considering what are the natural rates of this and how it's changing month to month. And that is something that I have a lot of background in public health, because that's how public health does surveillance. And I haven't seen as much of it in pharmacoepi, and I'd love to see that crossover happen. The second piece, I think, is the difference between signal identification and signal evaluation. And I'd also like to see us move into a world where we can do more real-time signal identification that doesn't simply rely on spontaneous reporting, which, as much as we all hate it, is actually pretty good. If you look at the signals that end up getting verified, a lot of them come from spontaneous reporting. It's great. It is. It's a lot better than, we give it a lot of slack, but it's a lot better than we give it credit for, particularly for how quick it is, and how relatively inexpensive it can be also, right? So I don't answer all of your questions, but those are the two that kind of came to mind in that.
To build on Heather's response, one of your first questions was, do we have the methods for causal studies? And we do. I mean, it may not be feasible every single time, but we have a number of design frameworks, like I mentioned, the target trial emulation framework, that is exactly that. Make sure that for the research question, we structure it in a way that is transparent, at least to the peers, and I think we need to work on the communication angle as well, but to at least not self-inflict ourselves the pain of building into a study in mortal time bias and all this litany of biases, etc., that we've had to deal with individually. So we can use the C word. We don't have to say the study suggests that. We can actually say, we can use the C word as it causes, which in non-interventional research has been a big taboo for several decades. But then again, how do you communicate the uncertainty? I think that's the part where all of us feel the least knowledgeable. It's something that we don't train in. During the pandemic in Barcelona, we had a great epidemiologist that had a 8 o'clock radio slot every morning, Dr. Antoni Trilla. And I don't know if it was by design or not, I need to ask him. He was talking to the journalist while he was walking the dog in the morning, which kind of gave it a kind of sense of informality and work in progress that, as I said, I don't know if that was part of it, but he would always start, as today, what we know is ABC. We don't know, and we're working on Z, X, Y. again, I felt in awe. I wouldn't be able to be in his shoes, but I think he did a great work on starting to frame this. But of course, it was the kind of audience that was not there, probably the people who still listen to radio in the morning in a formal program with sections and so forth. But I think that what we need is tips of how to frame the information and then the uncertainty, because by training, what do we learn through all of School of Public Health, etc.? We do work on a study and then we self-flagellate through the whole discussion section of the paper about all the things that could be wrong with it. And that's not the frame of mind that we can be when we want to communicate information, especially when we compete with these, I don't know how to call them, preachers of conspiracy theories that we need, that are competing with for our audience. Sorry.
So I want to challenge that for just a moment. So I actually think that the communication piece is really interesting because I think it's a place where we can learn from our young people. And I recognize that in that statement I'm saying that I'm not a young person, but I'm not. So young people do a better job of communicating scientific information and having that baked into their educational programs than ever before. And if you don't believe me, I would challenge you to go look at their posters, right? Or even the slides that they put up. The bottom line is up front at the top of the slide. They're communicating the information much more effectively. They've lived in an environment where they've got a camera in their face at all times, right? So they have a keener sense of how they appear to people. So I think this is a place where we can learn from the young people on how to do that better. I would also challenge us to connect with our communities more clearly. Like, who is your neighbor? I know that you might have maybe an ornery relative that doesn't always believe in the things that you believe in, that comes to a family meal. Engage with them. It'll feel uncomfortable. Communication often is uncomfortable. You'll get over that, I promise you. And that, I think, will help us get to that place. In terms of communicating uncertainty, we need the data pathways to get there. But we also need to be communicating about the work that we do when it's not a pandemic. Asking somebody to trust you when they're panicking is the wrong time to be building that trust, right? The time to be building it is before the pandemic, when we're talking to each other right now. I'll tell you, it's another bad joke that I make, so apologies, I'm just making all the bad jokes today. In safety surveillance and pharmacoepidemiology, I feel like the only time, we're like the CIA, the only time anybody ever hears about us is when things go wrong, right? Nobody has any clue the amount of time, effort, heart and soul and tears that go into the work that we do. And we're not communicating that. And the time to do that is now. Tomorrow's too late.
Can I just very quickly?
Yes, please.
Just to add on the communication, I think one point that I want to make is that don't feel like you have to do everything at the same time, because there are different communication that are required at different times and different objectives. And in some cases, it will require addressing uncertainty, but not in all of the cases. And I think, which is absolutely crucial, we need to do it. But I think one thing we haven't talked about when we talk about preparedness is literacy and health literacy. And that's where a lot of the work has to go. And I'm glad Pierre is back, because one of the things he always mentions is the game that they developed together with WHO, which is about trying to teach young people, young children, about vaccination and all of that, but also about information and how to understand information, how to understand data, how to understand things like uncertainty, which is where it has to come. It has to be that we teach everyone everyone has to understand how to assess the information that is put in front of them. Because we are living in a world where we have access to so much information. We need to have the tools, and we need to give those tools to everyone on how to assess it. And that means building an understanding of what scientific uncertainty means. It means a lot of things as well. But I think that's where it has to come. And maybe that's a distinction that, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have some other questions from the audience, please.
Yes, I have a question. Paolo Palma, Vaccinopolis and University of Rome. I'd like to ask you, I mean, we listened quite a lot this morning about the importance of data, so I would like to ask you a little bit regarding safety data in the vulnerable population, so particularly in patients affected by chronic conditions. I think personally that many times these patients are still actually a little bit excluded by the current scenario, so we really need more data in order to provide clear information to them. So this is my impression. So I would like to ask you, what can be the role of vaccine for you for this type of groups?
Okay. Well, from my perspective as a data access partner, I think with the pandemic, one of the good things that we have, at least in CDAP database, is that we have the possibility to link and have more information about different groups. We have information, our database is based on primary care data, but we have the opportunity to link all those data to hospital data. And from the beginning, we just have the 30% of the hospital, but then we increase and we have at this moment 75% of the data. So all those registers or sources of data, I think it is important to evaluate those risk groups, all these risk groups, because you will have a very broader view about what is going on in difference, because there are some clinical conditions that can be identified in primary care data that cannot be identified, for example, in hospital. So I think the richness of the data and having many different prongs of data, I think it is important to study those kind of risk groups.
Please, Susana.
Yeah, and very briefly, in fact, all of the protocols included in the design and in the analysis plan, the analysis of the vulnerable population and other subpopulations. In fact, this drives from the risk management legislation, where what is called missing populations, that is the populations that are not typically part of the clinical development program, are a focus of the post-approval safety studies afterwards, to see whether the drug is used in these populations and what effects it could have that are different or not from those found in the development program.
And tiny little cherry on the top. It's a beautiful question, because if I was going to write the business case for having real-world evidence rather than just clinical trials, it's about populations that aren't represented in clinical trials, would be number one in a long list. And I think it's the great strength of VAC4EU is to be having access to data from diverse populations. And so, let's always seek to have a diversity of data from as many member states as possible, etc.
And I can also add that there was the idea since the beginning of trying to do that, and probably we think we have done it during the pandemic, but according to the EMA, that was not enough, and indeed it was last year. It's never enough, and last year, really they funded a methodological study where we really went through the exercise of defining 10 different conditions in 10 data sources, really to be prepared to monitor in that case, there were autoimmune diseases. So we are ready now to study vaccine safety in those 10 populations, exactly because, yes, it was the idea, but probably we didn't get it correctly enough, so we are progressing into that. So thank you for this question, which was very, very important. Please.
Hello, hi. Giorgio Barbareschi from the European AIDS Treatment Group. I'm really pleased about the discussion here in the panel. I was really fascinated about what was said about communications. And I feel I'm one of the few community representative here in the room, and I felt that when there was a discussion on how to communicate uncertainty, how to communicate the outcomes even of the different the data, how to talk about science with the community, that was the missing link. I heard a lot about we have to educate ourselves on how to talk to the different communities, but then I feel that maybe I come from the experience, I mean, my organization come from the experience recently with the IPRA vaccine, where we had a full project where we have a whole work package dedicated to community engagement. And from the beginning of the project, we were involved in the clinical trial design. We were involved in providing input in the study, but in the participations part of the studies. So how to engage with the participants, how to produce the material that was needed to inform the participants about the studies, for the recruitment part and so on. And at the end also for the communication. So the communication was in our hands. Of course, we received the information and we had to digest for the community. So what I think that maybe, and I'm really enthusiastic about the experience of VAC4EU, but what I felt that it was a bit weaker maybe, or something that I think it food for the future would be to have more expand to engage more directly with stakeholder community partners. That's what I think that would really enable you, or at least give you a lot of tools and information on how to work out the communication part, because this is what we have done a lot in our experience, particularly from the HIV community. We have like almost 40 years working side by side with researchers, with different stakeholders. But I think that there are many other community partners who are really able to give a lot of, provide a lot of input.
Thank you. Really, that is a great suggestion, Peter. Of course.
I thought I might be second, but I'll go first. It's a lovely question, and I'm going to give 2.5 comments in answer. Or is it 3? I'm not sure. First point is, I've got the privilege of a 15-minute presentation this afternoon, and one of my key conclusions, or even visions for the future, is patient/citizen engagement. And the reason I have put that in is that one of my other responsibilities is running the clinical trial system for Europe, and patient engagement is more mature in clinical trials than it is in observational research, in my view. And I think we should, exactly as you're saying, be discussing when appropriate and when helpful with various patient groups or even citizen panels on the design of, for example, vaccine safety monitoring. I think it would be a good thing to do, and it will make us think much more acutely about the relevance of the research to citizens. So that was point 1, was patient/citizen engagement. Point 2, we've talked a lot about communication this morning, and historically we don't think as communicators, we think as researchers. We think as generating evidence and that the job is done. And I know it's a message that's been said repeatedly, but we're now realizing that we also have an obligation, be us primary researchers, be us healthcare data holders, be us regulators, to be the communicator as well. And I think we're only just starting to professionalize that. And we've got a huge journey ahead to become really good, particularly given how quickly the information world is changing. Because it isn't about publishing in the Lancet, it's about being on social media largely. Anyway, that's a whole another debate, the how. So I think that was my 2.5.
Thank you, Peter. Please.
No, I totally agree with Dr. Peter that because I was thinking more like this morning about communication. Should we include within our working groups another line of research, communication in health? But I think the community that will teach us about how to communicate in health, I think, are patients. Patients are, so I think we need to engage more patients in our roles so we can learn how to communicate and all the information, because at least I really don't know how to communicate all the real world evidence that we are generating at this moment to the population. With all those complexity of studies that we are performing, I really don't know, but probably patients will help us to understand more about how to communicate in health.
So I think My piece on this is understanding who wants to talk to us, right? And I think to that end, if we wanted to challenge ourselves to be more uncomfortable with who we're talking to, it's the people that already want to listen to us are already listening to us. The people that don't want to listen to us are already not listening to us. But there's a huge swath of people in the middle that are hesitant, that are curious, and we often paint them with a very exclusionary brushstroke. They don't like science, they're anti-science, they're anti-vax, and the truth is much more nuanced than that. So we have an opportunity with these people that want to talk to us. They're showing an interest in having the conversation, even if we might feel like we're getting yelled at a little bit, right? They're showing an interest, which is more than the folks that aren't listening to us at all. And we have an opportunity there to reach our arm out and help explain the good science that we're doing, the breadth of the science that we're doing, and allow them to engage with their communities as a trusted voice in that community around the science that we're doing. And also help ask them what the gaps are. Sometimes the best way to get into that kind of negotiation is to understand what the no is. No, I don't like that. Well, what is it that you don't like about that, right? How can we, maybe I just haven't communicated well that I am doing the thing that you want me to do, right? Or maybe it's that you have an idea that warrants better talking. Does primary data collection do a better job of connecting with patients? Maybe it does, right? And maybe that's important, and that's an opportunity for us to bring that voice in to a group that does not feel voiced and is big angry about not feeling like their opinions are being voiced, but at least they're bringing that to us, right? Communication, even if it's negative, is still communication, and that's a positive in my world.
Thank you, Heather. Guys, I feel that the communication is warming up. So let's have the last question. Then we have this afternoon where there will be other opportunities, and then, of course, during the lunch break. But please, the last question.
Thank you very much. My name is Duke Veen from Judas Clinical. I'll try to keep it very short as we need to go to the lunch break. I have a question for Felipe. I'm a trained statistician, but as much as I love my models, data quality always comes first. So I love your context about how your local expertise is really needed to interpret all of this data. But we also heard a couple of stories on the podium about AI used in data generation and curation. And I'm very much wondering, even with all your local expertise, do you have any ability to verify what proportion of your data, even within the same variable, is generated by AI or by humans? Because we know from survey methodology that the way we ask questions actually influences the responses that we get. Do you have any capabilities to detect this?
No, I'm sorry. I don't have the expertise in AI, but I must say the same as my presentation. I think local expertise, even that we have AI tools at this moment, it's important to understand all the context that we have in our data.
Sorry, just to jump in, because it's a nice opportunity. Rebecca asked a question about regulatory science. And I wanted to say it at the time, it would be quite a nice thing for VAC4EU to do, would be to either through a workshop or just drawing on the expertise of your members to draw up a kind of vaccine safety research agenda, which could then feed into funding calls and so on, and highlight some of the unknowns. And I think the AI question is huge, really interesting, because it really is only in the last year or two, since the launch of the large language models, that we've had this very prevalent use of AI, some of which will be excellent, some of which will be rubbish. And it will be having an effect on the data, and we don't know what that effect is, so it could be a really interesting topic to have some serious research done on.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this suggestion. I think it's a point well taken, and this goes really into this afternoon, where we will be speaking about the future. Daniel.
We also have online spectators here, and I have one last comment from not the room, but from the outside world, and I would like Taylor to read the comment. It's more a comment, and then we can close.
Yes. Thank you, Daniel. This is a comment from Carlos Duran from UMCU, and he says, great presentation, Felipe. Quick comment, we don't need to look at Asia or Africa to highlight the data gap. We lack partners and data from Eastern Europe.
And which is also true. Thank you very much, Carlos. We miss you, but thank you for this input. And guys, I'm very grateful for the opportunity of interacting with you in this excellent panel. So please be available for our colleague for additional questions during the lunch break, and then we go to the afternoon session to speak about the future.
Thank you so much. Okay, now.